Hey heroes, welcome to another insidious episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelate. The link is in the description below along with other places you can find me. The man known as Philip Masters was born in a small forested village called Dragorin in the tiny Balkan nation of Transia. A peaceful little community, Dragorin was nestled in the foothills beneath the imposing mountain Wundagore. When he was a boy, Philip's grandmother, a retired fortune teller, regaled him with stories of medieval times. Specifically, she told him how an Arthurian sorceress named Morgan Le Fay and her followers, the Dark Holders, once summoned forth the demonic elder god known as Cathan. Failing to control this god and unable to banish him back to the dimension from whence he came, the Dark Holders instead sealed Cathan within Mount Wundagore itself. Another notable relative was his uncle Andrew, who gave Philip his first whittling knife and showed him how to use it. The young boy took quickly to the craft and soon began sculpting lifelike puppets out of wood. It's unknown what became of Andrew, but nonetheless, Philip's home life eventually fell apart. After the death of his grandmother, his parents struggled to make ends meet, and his mother succumbed to alcoholism until she passed away as well. His father attempted to raise him alone, but before long he left as well, abandoning Philip to the local orphanage. Considered to be an odd child by many of those who met him, young Philip found it difficult to make friends, and so he often took to the forests and valleys of Wundagore to play by himself. It was there that he discovered a new material to use in his sculpting, a special clay that seemed almost to vibrate in his hands, guiding the movement of his fingers. It was also on the foot of Mount Wundagore that Philip met a young girl named Jessica Drew, whose parents had moved there with their colleague Herbert Wyndham. The two became frequent playmates, but then one day Jessica fell ill. You see, Wyndham and the Drews lived near a deposit of uranium hidden in the mountain. Despite their best efforts to handle the dangerous material responsibly, this led to Jessica contracting radiation poisoning. While her story is one we've talked about in other videos, all Philip knew was that he'd lost his only friend. And so he fell deeper into solitude, experimenting more with the Wundagorean clay as his hobby grew into a passion. Growing up without being adopted, he decided to leave the country as a young adult and moved to the United States. Proving himself to be of gifted intelligence, he attended university in New York City, where he became best friends and roommates with a man named Jacob Reese. One day, the two men had a peculiar experience when they encountered a woman who introduced herself as Alicia Clay. Acting cold towards Philip, she insisted that he would eventually be responsible for Jacob's death. While Jacob didn't believe this, suspecting the woman suffered from some sort of mental illness, Philip was more deeply affected by the accusation. You see, Masters knew that there was a darkness inside of him, and the time he spent working on his clay puppets helped him keep his more sinister urges at bay. When Alicia ran off, Philip went after her to ask her about the future, believing that she really could see it somehow. He wanted her to help him, but she simply told him that when the time came, he would have to be strong and fight his darker urges if he wanted to change his future. Alicia Clay disappeared after that, but as the years rolled on, the warning she gave wore on Philip Masters, causing him to question his own sanity. Nonetheless, he eventually completed his education, earning a master's degree in biochemistry and a PhD in biology. He stayed friends with Jacob Reese, serving as his best man when Jacob married his longtime girlfriend, Marcia Deaton. Philip even became a godfather when Jacob's daughter, Alicia, was born. From a young age, Alicia Reese was artistic, and as a little girl, she loved to paint. Meanwhile, Philip and Jacob built their own lab together near an upstate town called Watershed Lake. As part of his research, Masters imported large amounts of the Wundagorian clay and found it to give off low levels of radiation. At the same time, he found himself growing more and more jealous of Jacob's family life. Increasingly fearful of his own desires, Philip eventually decided that he would destroy the lab and leave the Reese family behind forever. However, as he prepared to do so, Jacob unexpectedly arrived and caught him in the act. Lashing out like a cornered animal, Philip Masters struck his best friend over and over and over again. The struggle continued as the vats of radioactive clay bubbled hotter and hotter, until finally Jacob stumbled backwards, hit his head on a piece of railing, and fell into the clay. Meanwhile, Jacob's wife and daughter, who had been waiting in the car outside, decided to investigate themselves. It was at that moment when the laboratory exploded, knocking Marcia and Alicia backwards. Initially, it seemed as though Marcia was uninjured, but Alicia, sadly, was permanently blinded by the explosion of radioactive clay. Philip miraculously survived the blast and vowed to do his best to protect Jacob's family. He convinced Marcia to marry him, after which he began searching for a way to cure Alicia's blindness, albeit without success. However, not long afterwards, Marcia also fell ill and died, having been poisoned in the lab's explosion. As a result, Philip gained sole custody of his stepdaughter, who henceforth would be known as Alicia Masters. This was of course the exact outcome that Alicia Clay was trying to prevent, as she was actually an adult, time-displaced Alicia Masters whose eyesight had been temporarily restored by a temporal anomaly. Sadly, it seems that some things in time are immutable, as this all would have happened with or without her interference. In any event, Philip Masters did care for Alicia and introduced her to the art of sculpting. The two moved back to New York, and while she didn't share her stepfather's aptitude for wood whittling, Alicia Masters gained a talent for creating incredibly lifelike statues with only her sense of touch to guide her. Meanwhile, Philip continued experimenting with his radioactive clay and discovered something remarkable. By using a specific clay mixture to sculpt a doll-sized representation of an actual person, he could control the actions of that person. This, of course, could not be explained by the radioactivity alone, but eventually Masters remembered the stories his grandmother told him as a child. How Wundagore Mountain itself was said to contain the spirit of the demonic elder god Cthon. He eventually realized that the very land around the mountain must have been corrupted by Cthon's dark magic, including his radioactive clay. The revelation of what his clay could do only caused Masters to sink further into madness as he grew increasingly neglectful of his stepdaughter. Seeking to bend others to his will, he decided to adopt an appropriate moniker and dubbed himself the Puppet Master. Fully embracing this new persona, he began concocting an ambitious plan that would eventually result in him ruling over the Earth. At some point in his scheming, he reportedly entered into a secret partnership with the criminal inventor Phineas Mason, better known as the Tinkerer. The two evidently built a number of hidden laboratories across the northeastern United States, and Masters acquired robotic technology from Mason, which he then modified for his own purposes. But before his plans could really kick into gear, the Puppet Master decided to test the limits of his power by forcing an innocent man to throw himself from the top of a bridge. Fortunately, this would-be jumper was seen by the Fantastic Four and rescued by their youngest member, Johnny Storm, the Human Torch. In the wake of this, the Puppet Master decided to use the heroic foursome to punish Storm for his interference. He created a puppet of Ben Grimm, the Thing, and summoned him to his apartment. Susan Storm, the invisible girl, followed him, but Alicia, having grown to rely on her remaining senses, detected her presence. This was before Susan developed her ability to generate protective force fields, and so the Puppet Master was able to flood the room with ether and knock her out. Once she was no longer invisible, the Puppet Master noticed a passing resemblance between Susan Storm and his stepdaughter, and so while he kept Susan alive, he had Alicia impersonate her and accompany a mind-controlled thing back to the Baxter building. Alicia was confused about why he was doing this, but the ruse lasted long enough for her and Grimm to get inside the FF's headquarters. There, the Thing obeyed the Puppet Master's instructions to attack his teammates. However, this was in the early days of the Fantastic Four when Ben Grimm's transformation was more volatile, and certain chemicals could cause him to change back and forth. As such, Reed Richards was able to temporarily transform him back to human form, breaking the Puppet Master's control as he no longer resembled the figure. Of course, once the fighting was over, the FF quickly noticed that the Sue who'd followed Ben was an imposter. Ben explained what he could remember about the Puppet Master and comforted Alicia. He shifted back to his Thing form while the chemicals he was doused with dried, but ironically, Alicia seemed to prefer him that way, and thus the first seeds of a long and winding romance were planted. The Puppet Master, meanwhile, continued his schemes, orchestrating a massive breakout attempt at the state prison by seizing control of the warden. While he was distracted, the Invisible Girl awakened and attempted to make her escape. The Puppet Master used a doll he'd already prepared to prevent her from running, but she nonetheless succeeded in alerting her teammates to her location. Reed, Johnny, and Ben soon arrived on the scene and came face to face with Master's largest creation, a mentally controlled robot puppet. As impressive as that machine was, it was still no match for the strength of the Thing, and was swiftly defeated. Masters, meanwhile, made his escape using a jet-powered flying horse puppet. He tried to take a captive Susan Storm with him, but she was rescued by Mr. Fantastic. The FF were reunited, but before they could go after Masters, they needed to save the warden and quell the riot at State Prison. Alicia, meanwhile, returned to her room and changed back into her own clothes while she attempted to come to terms with the menace that her stepfather had become. Not long afterwards, the Puppet Master returned to retrieve a puppet he'd created of himself, as the undisputed ruler of the world. Alarmed by his increasing instability, Alicia turned against her stepfather and attempted to wrest the figure from his grasp. In the ensuing scuffle, Alicia slipped, accidentally causing the puppet to fall to the floor. The Puppet Master attempted to seize it once more, but in his frantic haste to do so, he inadvertently tripped over his stepdaughter's arm and tumbled out the window. Scant seconds later, the Fantastic Four arrived to find Alicia weeping by the broken glass. Having missed all the action, the team were curious what had caused the Puppet Master to fall. Taking note of the regal-looking doll lying on the floor, Reed wondered aloud if they would ever truly know. While that could easily have been the end of the story, the Puppet Master actually survived the fall and ultimately escaped. He spent several months recovering in a small convalescent hospital where he could stay without being recognized. After that, he returned to one of his hidden workshops and began plotting vengeance on the Fantastic Four. In his first attempt, he orchestrated a battle between the FF and Namor the Submariner. While the heroes never encountered Masters directly during this incident, Alicia sensed her stepfather's involvement. The Puppet Master later tried to turn the Torch and the Thing against one another by having Johnny make a move on Alicia. The two did indeed battle each other, but even while controlling Johnny from afar, Masters found that neither man was fighting to kill. Furthermore, this incident essentially confirmed Alicia's earlier suspicion that her stepfather was still alive. Things came to a head when the Puppet Master got close enough to exert his will over Johnny more completely. He was thwarted by Alicia when she arrived on the scene as well, and helped Johnny destroy the puppet that controlled his actions. The Thing was naturally ready to pummel the Puppet Master, but Alicia still cared for the man who raised her and convinced Ben to let him go. They suspected that he would no longer be a problem since his hands were burned when the Torch's doll caught fire, but before too long his injuries healed once again. After that, he started working with another criminal genius, the Mad Thinker. Together, they engaged in a plot to pit the Fantastic Four against the mutant superhero team, the X-Men. Using the Thinker's precise calculations, the Puppet Master was even able to control the powerful telepath, Professor Charles Xavier. Although doing so was far from easy, and this scheme ultimately failed as well. Nonetheless, the Puppet Master and the Mad Thinker avoided capture and escaped together. The two later pit the Torch and the Thing against each other again, but as you can probably guess, this scheme was no more successful. After that, the Puppet Master began using prosthetics to alter his appearance, which he misleadingly referred to as plastic surgery. He continued concocting schemes and building machines, sometimes using technology acquired from the likes of the Thinker or the Tinkerer. In one instance, he utilized a mechanical doll called the Ice Queen that could shoot frozen air. That machine was quickly dispatched and destroyed by the Thing and the Human Torch. When his funds began to run low, the Puppet Master again seized control of Namor and sent him to rob the nearest bank. However, when the Submariner was injured in a battle with the authorities, he returned to the water, momentarily restoring his senses. That was enough for him to fortify his mind and, through sheer willpower, break free from the Puppet Master's control. Masters then tried to seize control of Xavier for a second time so that he could again send the X-Men after the Fantastic Four. But, perhaps unsurprisingly, the Professor's mental defenses would not be penetrated by the same method more than once. This time he simply shrugged off the Puppet Master's attempt to control him with little effort. And so Masters instead manipulated the power-copying superhuman known as the Mimic into attacking the X-Men. He also controlled the Incredible Hulk and sent him to attack the Submariner, and later aided the Mad Thinker and another criminal mastermind, Egghead, in their own nefarious schemes. He forced the armored Avenger Iron Man to attack the alien warrior Captain Mar-Vell, and worked with the Mad Thinker to send a legion of androids to attack the Fantastic Four. Suffice it to say, each and every one of these plots resulted in abject failure. And yet, the Puppet Master always managed to survive and escape to plan another day. Now, we're obviously not going to go into detail about all of these exploits, but it is interesting to note just how active the Puppet Master was in the early years of the Marvel Age. After all of that, there was an incident in which an alien spacecraft crashed near a workshop he'd built on Long Island. Inside, he found a humanoid robot called Baylox, which he then took control of using his radioactive clay. In truth, this was actually a mechanical scout used by the Skrulls during their war with the Kree. Calling this machine his Monstroid, the Puppet Master used it to infiltrate the Baxter Building while the Fantastic Four were away. This time he was seen and ultimately defeated by Spider-Man and the Vision. While the Wall Crawler went toe-to-toe with the Monstroid in a difficult fight, the Vision used his intangibility powers to confront the Puppet Master and destroy the Baylox doll. The Vision soon departed, but Spidey stayed behind while Ben Grimm and Alicia Masters returned and found him and Masters there. Face to face with his stepdaughter for the first time in months, Philip confessed that he was responsible for her real father's death and begged her for forgiveness. He insisted that he still loved her, and while part of her felt the same way, she was unable to forgive what he'd done. He also claimed that Alicia's blindness might not be incurable, and led Spider-Man and the Thing to one of his hidden labs. However, this was a facility he shared with the Mad Thinker, who fired a pulse beam at the two heroes while Masters slipped inside. With Alicia left behind in the Fantasticar, the Thinker also dispatched one of his androids to her location, claiming it was for her protection. But upon hearing his frightened stepdaughter screaming through the monitor, Masters demanded that the Thinker call off his machine. The Thinker, however, did not respond well to being given orders and slapped his supposed ally away. As the Thinker turned his attention back to his computers, Masters snuck up behind him with a wrench. He found himself too nervous to attack, but Spider-Man intervened and shot a web that knocked the wrench against the Thinker's head. The wall crawler then tied the two villains up while Ben Grimm defeated the Thinker's android. The Puppet Master, however, escaped from his bonds and caused the lab to self-destruct with him in it. Alicia suspected that the years of guilt had finally become too much for her stepfather to bear, and that he attempted to end his own life as penance. But Masters narrowly survived yet again, and this time was recovered and nursed back to health by an obscure villain named Radion the Atomic Man. With Radion making his clay even more effective, Masters was able to control the mighty Thor, forcing him to battle the Thing. However, Benjamin's ally, Wonder, had the power to absorb radiation and forced the Atomic Man to flee. Wonder was also able to drain the excess radiation from the Puppet Master's clay, releasing Thor from his control. And for the first time, Philip Masters failed to escape and was finally imprisoned. He did successfully have some of his radioactive clay smuggled into a cell and used it to control the hero Luke Cage. He had Cage break him free, but was soon apprehended once again by the Fantastic Four. Now, there are plenty more stories involving the Puppet Master, but that pretty much covers his origins and his early years. If you would like to know what happens next, then be sure to let me know in the comments, and if not, then go ahead and shout out what topics you do want me to cover. In the meantime, that is all I have for you this week, and thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you will get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. And as I said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, then be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!